Hello everyone. Thank you all for coming together today for the sole purpose of promoting discourse on America's biggest problems. The speakers here have dedicated their times to illustrate for us what exactly is the problem at hand and their own perspectives surrounding said problem. I thank them for the time that they have given us, and I also thank the time that Professor Audrey Falk has given us and the time that they will share in their feedback and their own perspectives surrounding said problem. This is going to be a very engaging and opening discussion. We are in what I like to call the Great Rethink, a new era in which we as leaders and current leaders reanalyze how we have approached and will continue to approach issues in America. Perhaps this rethinking would allow for revolutionary solutions that provide the most benefits for the American people. Again, this is to promote discourse on America's biggest problems, and I hope this stimulates further conversations and hopefully brings up more questions surrounding the problem at hand and other issues that our national conversation will begin and hopefully find the most perfect solutions for. Before we get into the conversation, a brief introduction from our CEO, Jeff Hall, will begin now.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Hall. I'm an old newspaper guy going way back. I started as a cub reporter at the Kansas City Star. Later on, became a vice president at the LA Times. I worked at the White House for a year. I'm a business school grad, and I've always been interested in public policy and politics and journalism and how that all comes together. And I think it's fair to say that everybody is concerned that in recent decades, things have become more and more and more partisan to the point where it's truly dysfunctional now. Nobody likes each other. Everybody's mad. Nobody can make progress, or it's very difficult to make progress. And so here at our national conversation, we want to be the antidote to all that. And so we're starting a media company that's part media outlet. It's part think tank. It's for young Americans to gain a foothold here. This is a platform that is largely built and run by students with some adult supervision. And what we're trying to do here is get America talking again. So that's sort of a baby step in the direction of really solving America's problems. But we've done quite a bit already. First thing I'd like to point out is the students wrote a book called Let's Fix America. It has 34 nonpartisan solutions to problems facing America, big problems and big solutions. We have finished building a website, our nationalconversation.org. We're almost finished. We're putting some finishing touches on it now. We're writing some new books, and now we're starting these events that Tanya and Jordan are putting on starting today. And so more and more, you're going to be hearing about us, and we want to hear from you. We want this to be a two-way conversation. So if anybody here is listening and wants to write for us or appear on one of our podcasts or get involved as an intern or as an adult mentor, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is info@ournationalconversation.org. Tanya?
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jeff. And now I welcome Amber to open up the conversation.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amber. I am the team lead for social issues. And so today we are talking about community engagement, and we're focusing on the issue of whether or not community service / volunteering should be mandatory at the national level. And to start off, I'll just give a brief overview before we get into the more nitty-gritty of things. So while this concept is nothing new, there has been a flare-up of interest and government action in what people commonly now refer to as mandatory volunteerism in the past few years. So far, 20 states have already asked for federal approval for legislation to be passed, and Kentucky is so far the only one that has gotten it. A general summary of what these proposals are asking for is basically that a certain number of volunteer hours or work hours will be required for anyone to receive welfare benefits such as Medicaid, unemployment checks, food stamps, etc. So one of the most common arguments for this proposal is that it will really help meet or at least fill in some of the gaps that is appearing in the rising demand for volunteers. So AmeriCorps, which is the Corporation for National and Community Service, estimated that The percentage of our population that actually volunteers has dropped from 30% in 2019 to just 23.6% in 2023. And since we already are aware of the trend that our population is aging, the need for volunteers is only going to continue to increase with time. Also, some people argue that there are too many people who take advantage of welfare programs, and this policy will make it so that there won't be as many quote unquote freeloaders on our social security and social welfare programs essentially. And however, on the other hand, there's also a lot of arguments being made against it. And in my research, I feel like the most compelling one that I read was from the National Council of Nonprofits, since again, nonprofits are the people who are generally going to be involved, or like they will have to be the ones coordinating with all these volunteers. So they stated that they are actually against any policies that make volunteering mandatory, since it will only lead to, and I'm quoting them, increased costs, burdens, and liabilities on nonprofits by an influx of coerced individuals. We will get into a lot more detail throughout this whole session later. And I also wanted to clarify that our conversation today is more general in the sense that it's not really only about the methods to enforce this policy wouldn't necessarily be done only by potentially cutting people off of their benefits. This quick introduction is just hopefully to get everybody thinking about whether compulsory community service is a good idea, and if so, are there other better ways to implement it? And yeah, we will be going into a lot more detail on both sides of the argument as well in this session. And that's it for me now. Tanya?
Thank you, Amber. I now welcome to the floor Megan to showcase their perspectives and the correlation between health and volunteerism.
Thank you, Tanya. In doing my research on both healthcare, the volunteerism and the community engagement benefits for both, I wanted to split it up real quick. When I was researching, the benefits to volunteerism, I thought it was interesting that when you volunteer, it can lower your stress level. It can decrease other health problems such as, heart disease and stroke. And what I also thought was interesting is that it can be associated with calm feelings, such as dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. When you do something for someone, you help someone out, you donate goods to the community, the dopamine kicks in and you want to do more of that. You want to continue to help someone out because it makes you feel good. And so that's what dopamine is, that hormone that makes you happy. It gives you joy and drive. All the more reason to volunteer because you want to get something out of it when you help somebody else. It's also a reward system, kind of like drinking lemonade. If you like lemonade, you'll drink more because, it feels good, it tastes good. So that's the dopamine aspect of volunteerism. Let me jump into community engagement as well. The benefits that I found was that it can build trust and social justice. For example, social justice is the focal point where, like-minded individuals can combine their resources to ensure that their equity and political and social preferences are, stable and reasonable. You find like-minded people who have the same goals of helping others and to engage in community projects. And so, we want to make sure that there is open-mindedness when you engage in the community. And so it also builds a chance for new leadership. And when it comes to outreach, you can spread awareness about the organizations that are going on in the community. But before community engagement can happen, we want to make sure we strike up relationships within the community so that dedication is the common mindset, among the community in order for it to thrive and for it to grow. I just think it's very important that everyone is on the same page. If this is what you want to do, then you should have, just like ONC, community meeting dates and times must be established, and schedules and contact information first and foremost, and then, have a clear plan of what you want to do before you go into community engagement. But I thought it was very interesting for both of these as it correlates to healthcare about the benefits of each, as I reiterate, going back to what it does for volunteerism. Who wouldn't want that dopamine to kick in? When I had helped someone out, I was given a $200 grant, and I was able to help someone in my community by going on Walmart.com and getting all these canned goods and boxed drinks and toiletries to help somebody in need. So that made me feel good when I was able to be more of an asset in my community. So thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Meg, for illustrating if there were any correlated health benefits in terms of volunteerism. I now welcome the floor to our foreign policy team, Rohan, who's going to share this global perspective, as in, has this been done before?
So strictly speaking, no is the answer. This is for a lot of reasons. A lot of them have to do with simple practical concerns. So if you're going to make people do things, it's very hard to make them do things for what to most people would seem like almost no reason. Historically, that's been done for stuff like national defense through conscription, and that has a long history dating back to, at the very least, the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Even those programs have quite a few problems with them, with sort of the morale of the people involved, the commitment that they have to carrying out the tasks that they've been asked to carry out, and the rather difficult question of trying to balance civil rights and civil liberties with the need to do these sort of things. So in countries nowadays that do have conscription, they do offer something in lieu of military service, right? Because nowadays we are much more accepting of people who have moral compunctions with conscripted military service. Those include stuff like offering, in exchange for not doing military service in the traditional sense, you do EMT service, or you be a forest ranger or something else to allow someone else to do these other critical jobs. And that brings me to sort of my second point on this, is that most of these volunteering jobs do require some degree of physical labor, especially the ones that aren't being filled, right? And that's part of the reason why they're not being filled. And I think personally, one of the things that we've seen, and one of the reasons that people don't get conscripted normally, is because they're incapable of doing the physical labor needed for a soldier, right? And historically, that has been the case in the US, it's been the case generally across the globe. So when we talk about mandatory national service through a volunteer program, through those kinds of civic programs rather than a military program, it becomes difficult to justify, and it becomes difficult for governments globally to justify, rather, and it becomes difficult for them to carry out these policies because it's somewhat of a touchy subject at the best of times. So yeah, and thank you for having me on as well.
Thank you, Ra. And this is the next segment as well, I like to call the good stuff, in which our healthcare team, Meg, will start off with her proposal, right? The idea of like why this is such a good thing that we should be doing. This is very stark against most perspectives, which believes this is not a good thing. So this would be a very interesting take.
Maybe I'm beating a dead horse, but who wouldn't want to participate in something that can reduce the risk of heart disease and stroke? When you help somebody in need, when you volunteer, it should make you feel good. It's a good thing because it makes you look at how blessed you are. Also, it's a good thing because health-wise, I think it's linked to a good quality of life. The more that you are engaging in something that could help somebody, like I had mentioned about the $200 grant, I really felt good. I felt calm. If I had a stressful day, I didn't even think about bills. I didn't think about school. I thought about how those canned goods could impact somebody's life, it's like a two-way street. It's a win-win when someone can tell you thank you for what you've done, and in return, that thanks makes you feel good because you realize that you've made a difference. Yet, healthcare-wise, volunteering and community engagement is also a good thing because you can acquire more skill. They have so many things that if you want to volunteer in the Red Cross, as a matter of fact, I got so many projects going on because I am a helper. It help you to hone your craft, hone your skills. Maybe if it's clerical on the clerical side, or when you're getting out face to face with someone else, you could get to make an impact. So it really should help you out health wise, mentally, physically, and it makes you smile. There's not a lot of people who smile anymore. It should make you feel really good that you are involved in something worthwhile. So that's why I feel that volunteerism is needed. Habitat for Humanity, you name it. So you can never not find any opportunity out there. There's, as they say, a buttload of opportunity. Excuse me, but that's why I feel this is good, for your health. And so I want to thank you for your time.
I think Beck brings up a very excellent point about the idea that there are a lot of opportunities, yet we don't see people engaging in them. So perhaps by having this in a compulsory manner, would we then see this engagement and people be able to remove this idea that even if it wasn't a choice, they're still reaping benefits from that, not only themselves, but for their community as well. But I think this is some ideas that Rohan might disagree with. So Rohan, how about you go ahead and share your perspective on this as a proposal, right? So the problem being that people are not engaging enough with their community, and this leads to a decrease in social justice. So how can community engagement be encouraged if not by compulsory standards?
So first of all, thank you for those statements, Mike. And I do agree. There's a lot of benefits to volunteerism and volunteering. Again, there's sort of two things at play here. I think, first of all, while volunteerism is good, but isn't there something of a cheapening of volunteerism when we force people to volunteer for things? That's not really volunteering. And that's what any government, any program that forces people to do what they would not otherwise do does, right? There's a coercion element in there, and that kind of cheapens the value of the act, right? And while I agree there's a lot of benefits to volunteerism, it's also somewhat unfair, right? A lot of people can't afford to volunteer. They can try, or they're just physically incapable of doing the task that needs to be done. And that shouldn't be viewed as a negative. It shouldn't be viewed as a stigma on them. But the bigger question here is sort of, do we have the right in our society to tell people to do something that otherwise they would not do? The other solution I would offer is to solve the bigger problem of community engagement is to incentivize that, right? A lot of people are willing to do jobs like, if we, for example, that involve community engagement. For instance, if we look at teachers, one of the reasons that educators in the US typically have shorter than normal careers nowadays, especially in recent times, is because of a lack of resources and lack of funding. You can make more money doing something else, then why would you spend your life teaching people, right? Or if you look at EMTs, why do they have, again, similarly short careers? It's because if you can make more money doing something else, why are you doing this difficult job? So if we want to look at the solutions to community engagement, some of that has to be economic. You can't force people to volunteer, and you have to give people the right incentives to be engaged in their community. That's sort of what I'm trying to get at here. One of the big problems we've seen with other forms of national service is that people are unmotivated to do their job and do their job well, unless there is some outside pressure, if there is some outside reasoning for a person to do that job and do it well. you can look at sort of the conflict in Ukraine at the moment and see two militaries that do rely on conscription doing very, very differently because of their structure, right? And how they view things and how they view their people. So my argument against the whole idea of mandatory national service is that it undercuts both the value of service and the quality of service, and possibly even the goal of the program, which is to integrate people back into their communities. Because if you're being forced to do something, there's a good chance that a lot of people would find that unappealing and something that they wouldn't really want to do.
So Rahan hits on a very important idea, right? The incentives around community engagement. At the moment, there isn't really any unless you're already inclined to do that. And Amber sort of hinted at this in the beginning, right? How Kentucky is this proponent of having incentives. If you want to have these welfare services, then you need to be committed to community engagement services, right? Is that the middle ground, Amber? Is that still a choice if it's an exchange, right? So in exchange for these welfare services, you have to commit to serving your community. Will you call that a middle ground, or is that still, as Rohan says, still not a choice?
I personally don't think that that is still a good idea. And I kind of wanted to dial it back a little bit to both of Meg and Rohan's arguments. So Meg mentioned that, like if you do community service, you will get a rush of dopamine. But I wanted to kind of also say, but that only applies to people who really actually want to do it and they enjoy doing it. But if somebody is forced to do it, that sense of like that rush of dopamine won't be the same for them. And again, and to add on to Rohan's point that yeah, there's some people who might just physically not be able to do it. It also applies to people who already are struggling to make ends meet, to put food on the table for their family. And they're probably also like their time could potentially be better spent like trying to find opportunities that would help their own family or themselves too. So I feel like forcing people to volunteer isn't really the right way to do things. I agree that we are lacking a lot of, there is going to be a high demand for volunteers. And I did find a solution or a middle ground type thing where I think could work. And this has been implemented on a national level in Switzerland. It's called time banking, which is also a form of time-based currency. So it essentially is where, for example, I go do community service for 2 hours today. I go help out the elderly, I go mow the lawn. Those 2 hours get added into my banking system. And when I grow older, or if I, unfortunately, fingers crossed, it doesn't happen, but if I get into a car accident and I need somebody to come help me, then I can use those 2 hours to ask for somebody to come help me out. So it's a form of, it's an exchange too, but instead of using money or forcing people to do things that they don't want to, then this type of currency could be really helpful. And again, also going back to the whole, we have an aging population. I think this also can be a really good like side solution to it, where since again, our social security funds are estimated to be depleted by 2037, according to the Social Security Administration. So there's going to be a lot of things that need to be done in order for people who need help to receive that help. And if we start providing these incentives for people to think about, oh, if I like start doing it, if I start going out and helping people who need it, I can get the same help when I'm older or when I need it. And that instead of forcing people to do it, which can again like bring resentment and also even make it more dangerous for people. If like I'm taking care of somebody who is disabled and they might fall, but I'm like resenting the fact I have to be here, I might not pay attention to them as much as if I voluntarily chose to want to be there. So I feel like the middle ground for me is going to be where it's like we just come up with incentives that make sense for everybody and people will actually want to go in and do it. And yeah, back to you, Tanya.
Thank you, Nambria. It does seem as if there is a pretty stark divide, right? As if we were to make this compulsory, I better have a good deal with it, right? And on the other hand, the proposed benefits should be incentive enough, which is really interesting. Before I even open the floor to comments and questions, I like to turn the floor to Professor Audrey Falk, who can give their own perspective surrounding community engagement and this idea of compulsory community engagement that has been proposed by Kentucky and can be kind of seen by that social timekeeping system.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to meet you all and to listen to your perspectives and to share a little bit about my perspective as well. It was really a pleasure comments to open up this discussion, and I'm happy to share a few remarks with you and then to answer questions or be part of the discussion following my remarks. So I am Audrey Falk, and I am a professor at Merrimack College, which is in North Andover, Massachusetts, and I run a master's program in community engagement, which is a fairly unique program. There are not a whole lot of graduate degree programs in community engagement or even similar kinds of programs. So I do spend a lot of time thinking about volunteerism and service and community engagement, and these are topics, as you can imagine, that are very close to my heart and important to me. I'm not going to share my entire biography, but I will say that when I finished college many years ago, I did go straight into the Peace Corps, and that was one of my early service experiences and a very, very transformative experience for me, an important experience for me, and certainly has shaped a lot of my thinking about service and community engagement ever since that point in time. So from my perspective, when I talk about community engagement, I'm thinking about experiences where individuals are actively engaged in service, meaningful service that has a reciprocal element to it, so that it's valuable to the individual who's providing the service, and it's also valuable to the communities who are being served. So community engagement has that reciprocal element, and it also has a number of other pieces to it, typically, especially when we think about things like academic service learning, where there's a preparation component and there's a reflection component that helps the individual who is serving to really understand what this service is about and what their role is within the community, and to help them to make sense of these experiences. And those pieces, you know, while they're part of academic service learning, I think those are really important pieces to be thinking about for any kind of community engagement experience, how the individual is being supported to process and understand that experience that they're having, so that it is truly beneficial to the community and so that they can also reap the benefits of that experience themselves. Oftentimes when individuals are providing service, they may be doing it in communities that they're unfamiliar with, potentially with populations that they don't have a lot of experience with as well. And on the one hand, that can be a truly eye-opening experience to learn about different populations and communities. And on the other hand, we can make a lot of mistakes in providing that service if we're not adequately prepared for those experiences. So those are some of the concerns that I would have in regard to kind of large-scale mandatory community engagement, where there's not really these kinds of components that help support individuals to prepare for and make sense of the kinds of community engagement experiences they're going to have. Because when we think about vulnerable populations and vulnerable communities that may have been exploited historically or marginalized historically, we don't want to add to that by providing service that isn't wanted or isn't needed or isn't done in a way that is culturally responsive and respectful of those communities. Again, more thoughts I have on why we'd want to be really careful about mandatory national community service. At the same time, as I've shared, of course, I am generally a great proponent of community engagement, and there is so much value to community engagement. And I loved hearing Meg's passion for the work and excitement and enthusiasm, and even her really wonderful points about the potential health benefits of serving, all of which are really, really great points and really important. But then again, like I think it may have been Tanya who said, who really reaps these benefits? Because if we are requiring somebody to serve, then are they really going to get those benefits from that service if they're not doing it out of their own desire to do so? Really wonderful points. I do want to say, in terms of the overall value of service, clearly having meaningful experiences that help to frame our vision of ourselves as capable people with skills, and developing our skills and developing our interests are wonderful benefits of service. The capacity to connect with individuals and even across difference is really one of the amazing benefits of community engagement. And the feeling that we are contributing to challenges in our society is also really important. And another aspect of community engagement, which I think connects a lot with the mission of this organization, is that of the development of one's identity as a citizen or as a community member, right? This idea that each of us are not just in life for ourselves or in life for our families and our friends. We're in life for, kind of the world, for the future of the world, for humanity. And I think that community engagement can help us to reframe our own identities as being ones of citizens, community members, and even global citizens. And I think that's really another very important aspect of community engagement. I also think that one of the things that's wonderful about community engagement is that all of us, any of us can serve, any of us can be engaged, and that all of us have so much to contribute. So each human being has different talents and different skills and different resources, and any one of us can bring our talents and interests and skills to community to serve, right? And we can serve in very, very different ways depending on what we care about and what we're good at, which is wonderful. And also, just as much, community engagement is something we can come to at any point in our lives, right? So we can contribute as children, we can contribute as young adults, and then also as older adults. And any one of us might come to community engagement at a different point in our lives, at a different point with different goals and purposes. And community engagement is sort of versatile in that sense, that it meets people where they're at some level. I spoke a little bit about the connection with diversity and social justice. And just to say a little bit more about that, I think that community engagement can also help individuals develop their identities as social change agents, right? So the idea that each of us can truly make a difference in the world, and through community engagement, we can build our skill sets and our sense of self-efficacy as people who can advocate and make change in regard to the issues and concerns that we have. And that is very important, to have community members and citizens who see not only what is, but also what could be, and who have a sense of desire and understanding of how to make change and how to kind of see opportunity and work toward social change in the interest of a more just and equitable world. So I want to try to close my remarks so that we can sort of all talk again together. Just if it if it's not totally clear, I think if I had to make a choice between compulsory service or not, I would err on the side of not having compulsory service. And that's because of how much I do care about community engagement and service, and my belief that each individual needs to come to that appreciation independently. I love the idea of really framing a national agenda around the value of service and the value of community engagement, and also looking for incentives for community engagement, but not making it burdensome or an obstacle that prevents individuals from getting needed resources. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to being part of the discussion.
Thank you, Professor. I think you put it quite beautifully how community engagement is important, how it's kind of a rare thing, right? Not many do participate in that, and it is a quite necessary thing in our society in terms of social justice and in general collaboration with our community. I, for one, perhaps I'm a unique person in this room who I think this could be a good idea, right? And let me defend myself. So, in this sense, obviously, from the COVID-19, when it hit, community service programs have seen a decrease in volunteers, right? So perhaps by having this, would we see more people removing themselves from the individual perspective and more into the group mindset, which I do think we as Americans need more of, not just thinking of the I perspective, but the we perspective. And by having this to be a sort of a mandatory issue, would we really develop that and really come together as a nation, right? Not just looking at what can I do to benefit myself, but what I can do to help others, right? And still, what convinces me that this still could be a good idea? Well, in some states, K through 12 education is compulsory, right? We have to do it. If we don't, well, we can get penalized for it. And this is done so individuals can enter the adult world well-rounded, right? So how is compulsory communication so different if it's their own goal is to really foster the social development of a society, right? So how different is that? And I really welcome the floor to engage with that type of perspective and question me or our speakers concerning this.
Yeah, so I wanted to, for your point, Tanya, what would you say about the people who really just don't have the time, like people who are working 3 jobs and they need to work at all of those jobs to be able to put food on the table for their family, and we're then still requiring them to still have to volunteer, put in hours to volunteer?
I would say that this service still can be adaptable, right? I'm not asking you to do 7 hours in one day at a community garden or a homeless shelter. I'm asking you to give me perhaps a fraction of that, giving me your time in exchange for your continued participation in society, right? Even if it's an hour in a day, despite having those 3 jobs, I still think it could be good, even if it is stressful, even if it is sometimes impractical for life. Maybe we need to make that time for our community. So that goes back to my idea that we're so stuck on the I perspective. Perhaps once we develop the we perspective, we can get into the conversations. Why does someone need 3 jobs to live in America? Perhaps that could be the opener for that.
So I sort of want to touch on 2 things. So first of all, I think that your point about education is worth going into a little bit, because that is a method of coercion that we use in our society to get people to do things, right? But there's a clear social, political, economic, and just general benefit to education that doesn't, that not to denigrate people who do community engagement, but those have exponential returns, right? Having an educated society has much better returns on investment than, say, running a food bank does, because there's a lot of ways that And that's not knocking food banks. Food banks are great. The people that do that stuff are genuinely some of the best people in our country at the moment. But there is not the same return on investment there is when it comes to educating people, right? So I think that's part of the reason why that's an understandable trade-off, right? That's a trade-off that we can all agree we should all give up that little bit of liberty to have that security, in the sense that, look, we want to have a better world for ourselves and our children and their children going forward, right? But when we look at stuff like community engagement in the system that you're sort of proposing here, and I don't want to put it on you, right? This is an idea that you and others have had. The problem with this is that when you do these programs, you also have to take into account what the social outcome is for everyone, not just for the people participating in the program. If someone is the sole breadwinner in their family and they have to go and work for whatever reason, there's lots of reasons why that could be the case. Is it fair to their family to take them away from that to make them do volunteering? Is it fair to have them do that with the threat of either a cut of welfare benefits or for retirement benefits to force them to do volunteering? I personally don't think it's fair, right? I personally look at that and say that's not a reasonable thing to ask people to do, right? Because what happens if you can't do it, right? Do you just not get those benefits? And if you do get the benefits, then what does that say about all the people that have to do it, right? And I think there is a benefit socially to encouraging people to volunteer, to encouraging people to give their time. But we have to understand that you can't force people to do things like volunteering. You have to meet them where they are, right? And I think that's my big thing. I think that's what really matters, meeting people where they are to get them into community engagement.
Just really briefly, I did have a question kind of concerning this issue of people having jobs and whether that would complicate their involvement in a mandatory volunteering program, and also the nature of the arguments for such a program. Because it seems to me that one of the primary motivations behind these sorts of programs, as was mentioned by Amber earlier in the presentations, is that yes, there are health benefits to volunteering. There's different rewards that can be reaped by the community as a whole. But then there's also this question of freeloaders and that sort of thing. People who might be using welfare and so forth without, as Rohan aptly put it, some apt return on investment. And I was curious as to whether we have any positions on whether this is, like a valid argument to levy, and whether such a compulsory program could be a problem. And then further, I was also wondering whether maybe just included in such a compulsory volunteering program, there could be exemptions for people who already have jobs, or who are some way or another demonstrating by some criteria that they are creating a return on investment to some degree or another. Or of course, exceptions for people who can't engage in volunteerism for health reasons and that sort of thing. So on kind of those dual questions, I was wondering if any of the speakers, Tanya, Amber, Meg, Rohan, and of course Professor Falk, had any opinions on that sort of thing.
If anyone knows me, I like to talk. So yeah, I do have an opinion concerning this. So my issue with the proposition that like Kentucky is sort of giving like a quid pro quo scenario is that this is specifically targeting a group of individuals, right? By those who are like economically vulnerable, who need these benefits, is specifically targeting them. And what I'm talking about is that everyone is being targeted, right? I want everyone being told to do these mandatory services, because if we only aim at those who are getting welfare benefits, we really have to think critically about who we're actually targeting. We're targeting veterans, right, who need these benefits to live. We're targeting minorities. We're targeting fresh immigrants. We're talking about a lot of people, right, but not the people who I want to be hitting, right? When I talk about people who I want to hit those who are living a very tranquil life, right? Living in their mansions or just not needing a 9 to 5 or two jobs like the everyday American, right? So when I propose this idea of mandatory community service, I mean mandatory community service to every American, every person in the United States. So when I say that this could be adoptable, that means that even the person working 3 jobs could do this, right? Do I have a specific plan in mind? I don't, but I do know that at the end of the day, even if they don't get the benefits of a dopamine increase, what we would be getting is a shift to the we perspective, right? The community perspective, which we see a lot in places like, I believe Amber said Sweden, or was it Switzerland? I'm sorry, I forgot, Amber, but that is a very we perspective community, right? Perhaps it's that way because of the social banking system, right? The need to really showcase how you're really helping your community. I think that probably America's biggest problems is one of the foundations has to be that we're not engaged enough with our community. We're not really understanding how every individual is affected by these community services, but yet I am still torn because Professor Falk really gave this good idea of wanted and or needed services, right? Can we be assuming the wants and needs of a community? Yes, I think that is one big fault of this type of mandatory service, right? We're assuming what a community might need as opposed to what they want. But I believe then we could have these individual like community meetings to sort of see what they need, because not every community needs a library team, right? Maybe they need some homelessness outreach, right? Maybe they need, or maybe they don't need a community garden, they need some youth leadership training, right? It has to be by a community basis, right? Really looking at what they need, which will be hard. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's going to be hard. But I still think at the end of the day, when we have these increases social injustices, we have individuals like Americans, like us, really just utilizing I perspective. Maybe this could be the way we could really make these problems personable, right? But then again, that's just my perspective. I can talk all day about this.
Can I cut in really quickly just to go off of what Tanya just said? So I feel like then based off of what you just said, I feel like the time banking system in my head feels like a really good system. You know, we still give people the choice. If you want to do it, you can. If you don't, and you have the 3 jobs, you don't want to do it, you can't do it, then that's up to you. But then people who are actually also are in need, they can let it be known that, hey, I need help at this time, and I'll use my hours here and to get it for free. And things can be like should be discussed further later on when it actually comes to fruition. But it's like, if we have the time banking system, it not only gives people the choice, it gives the incentive, and it also like lets people who need the help like have a platform or a place to go to tell people, hey, I need help right now. And people can then sign up to help. And I am wondering especially what Professor Falk would think about something like that in the US.
So I will be happy to speak to the time banking question. I think it is an interesting model. Before I speak to that, I just wanted to share kind of a general thought that, again, I think aligns a lot with this organization, that I think something very important to think about is how we frame a problem is linked with the solutions that we see, right, for the problem. And for me, individually, as somebody in the field of community engagement, the language of freeloader is extremely problematic, because the language of freeloader kind of suggests that there are individuals who are somehow cheating the system intentionally, and that they are kind of wrongdoers in a fair system, as opposed to language that would suggest that we have a very unfair system that privileges some and that targets others in society. So I think, at least from the way that I think about these issues, that language just isn't really helpful and it's not humanizing, right? Realizing that everybody in our world, every human is a human with their own strengths, their own challenges, and their own life experience that we want to be respectful of. I also think it's very important. I know I spoke earlier about this idea that one of the things that's so wonderful about community engagement is we each have so many gifts, we each have so many talents and strengths to give. I think it's equally important to acknowledge that every one of us takes advantage, reaps the benefits of nonprofit organizations and of voluntary services, right? And some of those are ones that you're so familiar with that you don't even think about, like your local YMCA or your church, right? Those are voluntary nonprofit organizations that we're all connected with. And then, too, as others said earlier, like Meg, I think, there are times in our lives that any one of us is struggling with any number of issues. It could be a disability, it could be a mental health challenge, all sorts of things that we turn to nonprofit and community-based organizations for support with. I want to be very clear with you that, personally, me, my family, on the one hand, here I sit as the director of a master's in community engagement. And on the other hand, I can't even tell you how many nonprofit organizations serve me or serve my children, serve my family, and how much benefit I reap from those organizations, right? So it's not like there's this one population of people who serve and there's this other population of people who are served. Rather, it's all of us being human, right? And helping one another. And I think that's part of the idea of this time banking that you're talking about, Amber. Really, it's just sort of formalizing that in a sense. I do think that the time banking model is a very interesting model, and I do think that it has benefits, and it's one that, I know it has been piloted in different communities locally in the US. And it could be something that could be explored further. I also think that probably across the globe, there's probably communities that do that in a more formal way and others that do it kind of just in a very, very informal way, that it's just kind of part of the culture of a place or a space, which can work too. Sometimes when we take these structures that are working just very spontaneously and we try to put an infrastructure to it, it may lose some of its natural spirit, let's say, which is again part of my concern about mandatory community engagement. But I do think the whole idea of time banking is an interesting one, and it is something that we can look at further. And I also think that there's, again, a lot of communities that maybe sort of do that without calling it, that it just kind of happens just by virtue of people helping each other in a neighborhood.
Hunter, you want to go ahead and give your comment or question?
Sure. So I am very much a person that likes to find a compromise in everything I do because I don't know, I don't like conflict. But I have my master's degree in community psychology. I work with nonprofits all the time. I volunteer all the time. One of the biggest issues is the lack of advocacy towards community engagement and the fact that like our generation doesn't know what it is because we grew up in a time where like you only volunteered if you wanted to get something out of it. For me, like I didn't know there were volunteer opportunities in my town growing up because I just didn't. And the fact that like we don't start in our school systems to advocate volunteer work and like some of these things that'll build the work ethic that people need later in life kind of surprises me. Like if you want to get a certificate for the National Honor Society, you need this many hours of volunteer work. And people just complain the whole time, but then they get a certificate and that's great. But like, what do you do with that certificate later in life? So like there's that reward initially until you hit college and realize that like nobody really cares after college what awards you got in high school and middle school. But like I went through a period of like not really despising volunteer work, but not understanding what it could be, because I didn't have that advocacy and I didn't have anyone saying like, you can just do it an hour a week. Like, that's fine. You don't have to commit like a serious chunk of time to this. You can go to the library and help for an hour. Like, that's fine. You can do what you're comfortable with. And now there's a website I use all the time, Catchafire, that is all nonprofits. They're small nonprofits that can't afford to pay, and they have volunteer opportunities posted. You can help make social media, you can make posters, you can help choose their board of directors. Like, you can do anything within your skill set and also build your skill set doing this. And it looks great on a resume. And like, that's another big plus of community engagement, is like, not only do you feel good about yourself, but the people looking at you for jobs and for other opportunities are going to look at you and see your morals are probably pretty good if you're dedicating your time to everyone else. So like, that's another benefit nobody really mentioned yet, is like that moral compass of an individual shows through the work they do in the community.
Perfect. That was really great. We're going to have Jeff Hall give his own thoughts into this real quick.
I was a little surprised and maybe even shocked to hear language like freeloaders or withholding benefits from people like Medicare or whatever if they didn't volunteer. When I think of volunteering in community service, I think of it as being a very positive thing. And I want to say I'm really appreciative of Dr. Falk for having volunteered to serve in the Peace Corps. That was something I always wanted to do. I was always going to get around to it. I never quite got around to it. I'm 71 years old. I still haven't gotten around to it. But in my generation, that was a very popular program. I grew up at the time of the Vietnam War, and a lot of people were doing anything they could to get out of military service because they thought they would get killed. So a lot of people went into the Peace Corps or Vista, or some people even moved to Canada or became conscientious objectors. But I think Vista and the Peace Corps and groups like that, AmeriCorps, I think they offer a wonderful opportunity. And Dr. Falk, I hope you'll be able to answer for people, you know, if you're young and you're still in college and you're thinking about becoming a volunteer, what are the opportunities? But before I get to that, once again, trying to stress the positive, I would say rather than think of this as being punitive or people who are freeloaders, we got to really put our thumb on the side of the scales when it comes to incentives. You know, if you volunteer, maybe you get free tuition, or maybe you get your student debt reduced, or maybe you just get great experience that you can put to good use later. But I think it should be all very positive and not punitive at all.
Yeah, that's really good. I like to clear something real quick. The language that was used was the language that the legislators in Kentucky were using, not the individuals in our own community out of this conversation believe in or really support. But it's still a really good conversation to know how that's very striking term these Kentucky legislators have used, and how traumatic that can be for individuals, right? So I just want to clarify that real quick, just to make sure we all know this isn't the belief or stance of our own Amber.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. It also isn't just Kentucky. It's just like proponents for that specific proposal. And I only use those terms because I was trying to go provide a brief overview of what's like the arguments are on both sides. And I was just like, oh, wait, I feel like some people are thinking that I am the one that is using those terms. And I just wanted to clarify that is not what I was trying to say at all.
Yeah, that was another thing I was actually going to talk about, because I think that is fundamentally unfair. If we're gonna penalize people for not doing volunteer work, then it's not volunteer work. It's a job, and you're not getting paid for it, most likely. And also, like Jeff said, I've always respected people that went into the Peace Corps, because it's a very rewarding job, according to some of my friends who have done that, because it's something that you get to be hands-on with people at the point of service, that when they need the most help. I believe President Kennedy referred to them at one point as, I might be wrong here, I heard this from a professor, as Green Berets without the guns, because they go into the places that are really dangerous and fix problems that need to be fixed with very limited resources and they get the job done and they boost our image across the world. But yeah, so stuff like programs like the Peace Corps are obviously very important. But I again keep coming back to this issue where we have mandating people to volunteer, because when you mandate people volunteering, that makes it not volunteering, right? If you're being told, oh, as Sandra said, if you're being told, oh, you need to go and get these X number of community service hours to get qualified for the National Honor Society, for example, that undermines the point of getting those hours, which is not that you are trying to, it's not that you're not helping, it's more that it isn't valuable to you at the time. So that's part of it. And I think that when we aren't clear about what are outcomes, what are the desired outcomes of a community engagement program like that, we aren't going to get the outcomes that we want, right? If we aren't clear from the outset that we want to have better community engagement, so we're going to make people do volunteering work, I don't think that will cut away with those outcomes coming with the work.
I got the message. No, I totally understand. That's why I did, like many politicians, I renamed volunteerism with community engagement, removes that choice aspect, which really dominated this conversation. But I feel this conversation has been genuine and really thoughtful, because when we look at the core issue which we're talking about, it's the lack of these people contributing to social services, contributing to our community. And when we see a lack of community engagement or collaboration with your own individual community, we stay stuck in the I perspective. I'm always going to say this in this conversation, the I perspective, right? Because I find that to be really fueling the problem, right? That how we're quite an individualistic society. So perhaps if mandatory community engagement isn't the answer, what can we do? What other mechanisms can be put in place that really encourage this idea? Should it start from the very beginning, inserting the we perspective into young children, perhaps, as in telling them what you do isn't for you, it's for the others around you? Can that be the middle ground?
In response to that, I feel like when it comes to younger children, I feel like it's different talking about maybe people who are in school, middle school, high school, versus when you're talking about society as a whole. Because I feel like, when you're younger, we know biologically, children, teenagers, their prefrontal lobes aren't developed that well yet. So at that point, maybe, yeah, we can think about making a certain number of hours mandatory for them to do community service, just so they get to experience it. I don't know what the right number of hours would be, but I feel like it might be a good idea to, at least put them in the community, or put them in the environment where they get to experience something like that and see maybe, oh yeah, this is something I really like. Maybe I want to go into psychology. Maybe I wanted to go into sociology. I want to do these things in the future. But I think that's a different conversation than when it comes to adults who are already kind of their brains are more fully developed and things like that.
I would just like to add, I think Amber brought up a lot of really good points there, but I also think that it's important when we talk about these programs that we understand that not everyone is going to be able to do them, and they shouldn't be penalized for not being able to, right? And I think that is something when we talk about mandating these kinds of programs, regardless of what the program is, if someone is physically incapable of doing the program, and suffers actual consequences for not being able to, that's a bit of a problem. And that's sort of my big holdup over this. I just don't think it's reasonable. And I think that's the ultimate question. Any government policy, is it a reasonable thing for people to want? And also the whole we culture kind of thing is that delves a little bit too much into cultural determinism for my taste, and I don't think that's necessarily why people don't do volunteerism as much here in the US, right? There's a whole bunch of reasons why people don't volunteer as much. It isn't just because culture, right? It's it's the economy, it's what skills are needed for what specific types of volunteering, and it's the ability of people to justify volunteerism at that scale, right? Or community engagement at that scale to themselves and to others around them, right? If you go and tell someone that you're going to, for instance, work in something that's really important but is undervalued in our society, people are not going to respect you in our society, and that matters to a lot of people.
You are right, Rohan, how that would be an entirely different speaker series, right? The culture perspectives, but we'll have to agree and disagree on that, right? I interrupted someone. I apologize for that. You can go ahead.
That's okay. That was me. So I just wanted to respond to a few of the comments that were made and just some of the ideas that were raised. One thing that I meant to say earlier that I wanted to come back to is that, particularly with the example that's been given about, again, going back to the sort of freeloading and the whole idea of mandatory service, that the reality is that people who are on real welfare or people who are unemployed or underemployed often do need workforce training and job skills. And the reality is that service experiences can fill that void or provide that opportunity. And there are many really wonderful nonprofit organizations that work with individuals on welfare by providing service opportunities that help those individuals develop job skills and then help those individuals re-enter the workforce. So I do think that the sort of general principle of using service experiences to develop individual skill sets and to help people enter the workforce can actually be very effective. And truthfully, of course, many of you who are students or have recently been students know that at some level, the same sort of strategy is used in higher education institutions in community engagement and service learning, right? Many of you have had similar kinds of experience where you've been exposed to different kinds of work opportunities through service through your institutions, and that's also helped you develop skills and develop your resume, as some of you already spoke to. And the other piece, related piece, which I think some of Rohan's comments kind of speak to, is the reality that nonprofit organizations are, on the one hand, such an integral part of our society, and nonprofit organizations do so much of the work of supporting families and communities across our country. And yet the work of nonprofits and community organizations and human service providers is, in fact, as Rohan has said, so undervalued. And so people are paid, very little, and positions that perhaps should be paid positions are often voluntary positions. So I do think that's another issue that really needs to be thought of in terms of why aren't we paying people for some of these roles that are so important to our communities. So that's another important piece to be thinking about. I also just want to come to the point that Jeff, was kind of asking before about my Peace Corps experience and, opportunities for individuals who want to be involved. And I'll say a few things. First of all, I'm just going to go ahead and put in the chat my email address. So anybody who is interested in following up with me is welcome to. No matter what the reason you're interested or the question that you have, feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. Certainly the Peace Corps is something I love and care about. And if anybody here is thinking about the Peace Corps and would like to connect with me around the Peace Corps, I'd be happy to connect with you about the Peace Corps. I would like to also share just one interesting piece about my Peace Corps experience, which is that, some of you have talked about just that the community building space of community engagement, right? That we connect with others around these community engagement experiences. And certainly that was the experience that I had in the Peace Corps. So I was in the Peace Corps in Romania, and I was part of a group of 25 of us. There were 25 of us who went at the same time to Romania the same year together as a cohort. And some of those people, as you can imagine, I stayed in touch with all throughout the years and remains great friends of mine. But I want to share with you that in the context of the COVID pandemic, when life was crazy and we were all, kind of stuck at home, my 25 folks, my Peace Corps cohort started Zooming all the time. So we sort of rebuilt our community in the context of COVID, and that was one of the most important communities for me during that crazy period of time, right? We all came back together as a family, as a community. And that's the kind of community that you can't buy, right? That's just so special to be able to have people who really understand you and who really connect you with you on a deeper level, and the people who you return to in a time of need, just as we kind of came back together as a group. It happens that the year after mine, so the next group of volunteers to go to Romania the year right after mine included a woman, Carol Spahn, who served those next 2 years. So we had 1 year overlapping. And you may or may not know that Carol Spahn was just inducted as the new director of Peace Corps for our country, which is so amazing because I knew her when. Another really cool thing. Anyway, so now I do have this very special connection to Peace Corps at the country and essentially the global level, which is pretty amazing as well. Anyway, Peace Corps is a great experience. AmeriCorps, Vista, all great experiences, and I certainly encourage folks to look for special opportunities like these. I don't want to give a big commercial because that wasn't ever the point of my being here, but I would say that if these things are exciting to you, I certainly encourage you to look at the Masters in Community Engagement at Merrimack College, which I oversee. And I do want to say specifically, just because of this point about kind of service and how it connects, that we do have, in fact, a fellowship program where we have students in our Masters in Community Engagement who give either a year or 2 of service and who therefore have full tuition scholarships for our Masters in Community Engagement. So that's really another wonderful aspect of our program, but also kind of an interesting tie-in to this conversation as well.
That was really terrific, Audrey. Our community team will definitely be reaching out about posting that on our website on our Get Involved section, because this is very important, as you can tell per the conversation. To provide our last question, we're going to turn the table to Jeff Hall.
I'm a little older than most of you, so I have the benefit of history. When I was growing up, we learned a lot about World War II. And they said it was a great foxhole experience, that, the privileged person whose family went to Harvard for generations was in the same foxhole as the kid who grew up in the coal mines of Kentucky. And it was a bonding and blending experience. Everybody got along, everybody was equal, everybody was in the cause together. We were fighting the Nazis, and there was a great cohesion there. So after the war, when they got back into the States, they had the GI Bill. So people who theretofore couldn't have gone to college suddenly could go to college. So that helped lift some people. And then we entered the 1950s, and they had what was called the Organization Man. They didn't have many women in the workforce at that time, at least not in the corporate sense. And they said people who had that bonding experience from World War II actually worked well together, very well. And they often refer to this generation as the greatest generation. And they built the roads, and they built the infrastructure, and they built the power grid, and just all the things that kind of led to modern day America and all the growth that we saw in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera. So I started off listening to this conversation thinking, community service, even mandatory community service, was probably a good thing because it would have that bonding effect. I think the more I've heard you guys talk, the more I've been talked out of that, because when you force people to do something they really don't want to do, they're not going to do a very good job of it. But nevertheless, I think something has been missing. I mean, even pre-World War II, they had the Depression and they had all these government programs like WPA and the Civilian Conservation Corps and all that. They threw all these Americans together to build roads and trails through national parks and that sort of thing. People loved it. It was a very motivational thing. So I'd like to see something come back that would replace all that. Professor Falk, have you got any great ideas on how to do that?
I think you raise a lot of great points, Jeff. You know, it's another thing I've been thinking of through this conversation that your remarks made me think about is Robert Putnam. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Robert Putnam's books, but they're very interesting on these types of topics. So a book that he wrote some time ago now is called Bowling Alone. And the Bowling Alone book talks about this idea of these trends that I think the first speaker started out talking about Amber, about these trends of, decreasing community engagement. And Robert Putnam gave a lot of different kinds of examples of the ways that we can see evidence that people are less engaged in their communities. And literally bowling leagues, participation in bowling leagues was the one example that created the title for the book. But this idea that we're kind of sitting at home more, watching our televisions on our technology, and that we're less involved in active public activities, right, with one another. And so this has been a trend for quite some time, Robert Putnam would say. Interestingly, he just published a book a year or two ago called Our Kids. And this book, Our Kids, speaks to this other piece that I think Tanya was raising, this we piece, right? Our kids is the way that we used to talk about children in the neighborhood. They're our kids. We all take care of it. That's the whole, it takes a village to raise a child. As opposed to my kids, we talk about our kids. And again, how do we frame these issues, right? How do we frame the children in our communities, right? So really good questions. I don't know that I have the perfect answers for these questions right now, but I'm glad to see a lot of, really caring and thoughtful young people engaging in the conversation, because I think that is the way that we will find the answers to these challenges that we're facing. I think that dialogue like this is one of the most important things that we can be doing, really having focused discussions and dialogue and listening to one another, respecting differences, and trying to come up with solutions to the challenges that we face in our communities is an important part of the solution. It's an important part of how we go forward. And I'll keep thinking on that. And if I've come up with more great things, I will surely be in touch.
I've got one more question for you, Dr. Falk. I am a son of Massachusetts originally. I live in California now. I've lost my accent long ago, but you don't sound like you're a native Bostonian or Massachusetts resident.
You are right. I am not.
Where are you from?
I am from Brooklyn, New York.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I went to the public schools in Brooklyn as a kid, and I came to Massachusetts first to go to college. I went to Boston University as an undergraduate student, and I have mostly stayed in Massachusetts all through the years, although I had, I don't know, I guess about an 8-year or so stint where I was living in the Washington, D.C. and Maryland areas when I had finished my doctorate. I did a couple of postdocs, and then I had my first faculty position at Towson University in Maryland. So I was away for a bit. But yes, some people still say that I still have a New York accent.
I knew it wasn't Boston. That's all I knew.
So-
We wrap it up.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I like to thank everyone, and especially Professor Audrey Falk, for really joining our conversation, right? Just by committing to coming to the series, we are really pushing this idea of the great rethink, rethinking and re-engaging with the policies that have been proposed for America's biggest problems. And hopefully we leave this conversation with more questions, more thoughts concerning community engagement, and concerning what else we can do to solve America's biggest problems. So thank you all for attending.
Wonderful. I look forward to seeing the book. It was a pleasure to meet all of you. You really got me very excited, and it's just a joy to connect with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.